Yeah. So welcome to this session. This is open discussion for open building standards. So we've got Brad White from SES Consulting, Brian Turner, Alper, Calvin, and Nicholas. Here we're gonna take this away and get going. So Brad, if you want to do an intro for the group, that'd be great.
Sure. Be happy to. Thank you, Kim. Welcome everyone to, I was going to say third annual session, I guess annual in quotation marks, but we're picking up from where we left off at AHR Expo in Orlando a couple of years ago, which was our second session of this type. And I'm sorry I couldn't make it in person, but I'm up in Vancouver and crossing the border was a little dicey right now. So thankfully the good people at Cochrane Supply have stepped up to put together this great hybrid event for us. And we've got a great panel, both in person and hybrid. So I'll turn it over to Brian in a second, who's going to moderate this discussion. But I just wanted to kind of give everyone a bit of a background of kind of how this session came to be, and you know, kind of what we're trying to do here. So I've been doing building automation as a consultant probably for about 15 years now. And in that time, I don't think I've once heard a client ask me to make their system more proprietary. Everyone wants their system to be more open, more accessible. But how do we get there, and what does that even mean? And I think that is a point that has been a topic of considerable discussion and some fierce debate over the years. And that's really what we're here today to do, I think, is to have that discussion. And we are really hoping it is a discussion. It's not just going to be us up here talking for an hour, but this is intended to be a dialogue and a conversation with everyone who's in the room today. And what we're hoping to do is to talk about the fact that, you know, large parts of our industry do remain very proprietary, but that's starting to change. And I think you're going to hear some really interesting things from our panel about some real important steps that have happened and some impressive progress that's been made in the last couple of years towards truly open building systems. But really, at the end, coming out of this session, what we really want to try to do is to talk about, you know, how do we make that change happen faster, and you know, what are the steps that we all need to take to get there. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Brian to get us started on that discussion.
All right, thanks, Brad. Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Turner, CEO of Buildings IoT. It's been, I think, about 15 years since I posted a LinkedIn article about open systems and what does open mean. And it's really frustrating today that we're still fighting this battle as hard as we were fighting it back then. And we're fighting against everyone, honestly, who is actually preaching that they're trying to fight it with us. And just so many times I feel like they're not. One of the most important things, and I talked about it back then and I'll talk about it today, and I know Nicholas just talked about it in one of his podcasts, it's really the business model. So we can talk about open protocols, we can talk about, you know, moving to more of an open standard as far as the communication media and the physical layers and all of that. But if the business models don't support openness, it really doesn't matter how open the rest of your system is. So you can have BACnet, you can have Modbus, you can have, you know, Ethernet. You might even be able to send all that data via MQTT and completely get rid of, you know, some of our historic you know, HVAC-centric protocols. But at the end of the day, if there's not multiple channels of supporting you, if you don't have a choice to change your service provider, then you're really not open. And I think that's still very much a game that we're fighting. And organizations, you know, whether you're dealing with a small mom and pop shop that has a building, or you're dealing with a gigantic corporation that has facilities all over the world, the last thing they want to do is invest in a technology or a manufacturer's products just to think that at some point when they start to feel too locked in, the prices are just continuing to increase because they have no service option, no ability to upgrade, to migrate, to actually manage these platforms or these technologies for them, that they would have to rip and replace. And it just becomes untenable. And so there's so many things that open should mean to all of us, and we're just not having the right dialogue at this point. And I think there's a lot of good examples of choices that we really do have. whether it's technology that we have, whether it's systems that we have, manufacturers that we have that really support the open standards and open protocols and open programming languages and open devices and, several different layers. So I'm pretty excited about this panel. I'm actually going to start with Alvin or Alper and then Calvin, and then we'll move on to Nicholas to get their insights, because they're pretty different, because they're going to be approaching open from different layers of the stack. And so it's pretty entertaining. So we'll do that. They'll give us a quick kind of dialogue about where they're from. And then we'd like to really have this be a discussion. We're in here for an hour. We certainly don't want to talk at you guys for an hour. It's a relatively small group. So we would really like to have some questions and some engagement here. So Alper, why don't you kick us off?
All right. My name is Alper Masler. I'm the founder of VSSG and Oncolabs. We started an open source project based on 2 open source projects that are out there that is a decade apart. Who has heard of Sedona framework within the group? Okay, who has heard of Haystack? All right, that's great. You know who wrote it? All right, Brian Frank wrote it. So Project Sandstar means that Brian in Sedona, Arizona, he looks down and sees the sand, looks up and he sees the stars, and that's where the name comes from. It merges Sedona framework with Haystack in a seamless whole, and it is open source. And the reason why we open sourced it is that the existing building automation system, you cannot have the configuration file loaded on a specific lender's device. So we created Project Sandstar so that the code, the configuration code, would be portable between different manufacturers. What we have done is we have OEM the device from Solodyne and also Contemporary Controls Raspberry Pi. We can configure both of the devices and move the logic between 2 devices. They are 2 different chips, 2 different applications, and Project Sandstar is able to do that for us. Also, on top of that, we have a stack where we can actually do the programming right on the browser. So the Sedona code is done right on the browser. We can, next slide, I'll just explain it shortly. So what is Sandstar? So within electronic boards, there are standards like I2C, UART, GPIO, SPI. What we are doing is we are converting those data into Haystack model and then passing it into Sedona framework. And the whole code is open source. Actually, Calvin is using it, and we have implemented different systems within Project Sandstar, like indoor air quality sensor, controllers, and other things. So it will enable us to go to where the PC industry is, where you can buy hardware from one manufacturer, other manufacturer, and be able to install the code and configure it and utilize it within this new model. We have never had this. Hopefully we will get there with the help of the community. So that's it from my end.
All right. Thanks, Alper. So as you guys can see, Alper is really focused on open source at a code level, right? So a lot of us probably don't even think about that, the actual control engine that's allowing these sequences to actually work. And so that we're still a long way, I would say, from having mass adoption at that level. And I honestly, I tell Alper this all the time, I'm not sure we'll ever get there, at least at that level. But there's so many other opportunities, but he's very passionate about that side. So if you do have questions, we welcome those. So Calvin is an integrator. So he's going to bring kind of that perspective as somebody who's actually trying to deploy these systems and what his thoughts are from a deployment standpoint.
Just have to turn it.
Oh,
Yeah.
hello. Okay, so what I'm about to talk about, I do not get paid for, and I'm not going to do it in the future as a business. I'm an integrator, so my job is basically buying the controller, making the drawings, having it installed, programming it, simple things, just fighting about scope and stuff. So like at work, we don't normally get this deep into these types of devices. But what I have here is kind of interesting. I have absolutely no experience with embedded devices. I didn't go to school for it or anything. I'm not familiar with PCB, which is printed circuit board design. This is the first PCB that I've ever designed. And what it is it's a prototype of a building automation controller that is kind of in line with what I would like to see in the industry. So, to kind of break down controllers into two different categories, you have these devices that are just configurable, like you can have VEV boxes that you can change the configuration of what the VEV box does, like you can make it reheat or not, right? But you can't change the internal sequence of operations of the device. And there's a lot of good choices out there. And if that controller does exactly what you want it to do, and there's no need to change anything, then it's fine. You just use them. It's a lot cheaper and faster, right? But then the second category of controls that everybody's familiar with here are the ones that you can fully programmable field, the wire sheets, line programming, all different kinds of programming paradigms. Now, those particular products I'd like to see a change in, and this is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see hardware that is unlocked, basically. Like, you have a hardware device either from a major manufacturer that has an open operating system that, the owner can get into, like they can get console on device and they can get into the system. And the reason they want to do that is so they can maintain it over the years. Like, this particular device has an open source Linux operating system, which is very similar to a lot of products that are actually out there. It's just that they're proprietary. So you have these devices, and the idea is that you own the operating system, you own the hardware, and you can put anybody's software on the device if the right things are done to package it up and deliver it to the device. And that's the real challenge, is making the software ported to the hardware. But I'm happy to say, a lot has changed in the past few years, and I see major companies stepping a lot closer into that direction. I saw a lot of new products on the floor today. They brought up some interesting things, like I hear people using the term container, which many may be familiar with. And what that is you have a way for, you have your device that you sell, it has an operating system, and they've created a way where you can take your software and package it with everything it needs, the libraries and things like Docker will help you take your runtime onto the device. So you're running your software on somebody else's hardware or custom hardware. And the reason for that is, why that would be appealing is you have your configurable devices that do what they're supposed to do, and as long as you're happy with them, you keep them. But you could use these on large pieces of equipment or even unitary devices. And the idea is that you'll never have to physically remove the hardware and throw it away and redo all the communications. And especially the worst part is doing the I/O on these things. Like, a lot of times at work, we're doing what we call brain transplants, where we take all the existing controllers out of a panel and we try to wire up our new controllers, replacing either ours or somebody else's old controllers, trying to wire it up the same way and make it do the same thing all over again. With open hardware, you wouldn't need to go through all that. It's really kind of a big hurdle that I see with a lot of owners, that it's really a pain for them to see that they have all the controllers in their plant and their VEV boxes, running just fine, but the company that set all the stuff up isn't like available anymore and the products aren't supported. So you're taking hardware that's running perfectly and you're removing that really for no good reason. With something like an open hardware device, you'd be able to just replace the software and keep all the physical installation in place. Some of it's brand new. I just did a chiller plant where it wasn't more than 10 years old. And I mean, that's new in the building world. I mean, everything was pristine. It's just that we're tearing out the controllers because nobody supported them anymore.
Thank you. Starts to sound a little bit like Android. But and it's going to go there. But if you're looking for another why, because a lot of the stuff Calvin brought up, you might say why. I mean, we're already controlling. Why do I need to customize it? I would stipulate that there's something that's very real right now and is going to continue to get more stringent, and that's around security and OS updates and maintaining your security posture and all of these devices, especially as they're IP connected. And if you actually have a common management platform, that your IT group, security group can run, that they can securely and safely update all of these firmwares and operating systems at scale, then you start to really build a use case more than just I can program or change a VAB algorithm, right? It starts to become much bigger. And I think that's when those types of things will take a much bigger hold. All right, so Nicholas, our guy is going to start a little bit higher probably with how this stuff is actually modeled, and he's a digital twin evangelist, and he talks a lot about it. If you guys don't know Nicholas, I recommend you follow him on his podcasts. He's got a lot of great ideas and great thoughts around what open means at all different layers. Nick.
Yeah. Is it a give a share something, or should I just talk about it?
You can share.
I mean,
you can share. You can share.
Yeah, let me do that anyway. So thanks so much for attending this session. Again, I wish I could be there. It's actually past midnight here in Sweden, where I am. And I remember the last time I was super jet lagged, so I'm thankful for not having that right now. My background is in innovation and strategy. Been working with the smart building sector, dumb building sector, hoping to sort of transition into smart buildings the last 5 to 6 years. And like Brian said, I mean, I'm really, really interested, or have been sort of going all at it and trying to understand, what does open mean? What does interoperable mean? And it took me like a couple of years to understand that even if it's open and you can get the data out, you still have to use a lot of the systems from the vendors, right? And even if you have to use the systems from the vendors, it's a slippery slope. And I remember asking Brad, I don't know if you remember this, Brad, right? But I mean, what would you choose? Like a system integrator using modern tools and, with no service or something like that, or, someone that you can really trust using old tools, but that it works. Like 10 out of 10, you said, okay, yeah, I'll just go with the one that I know works and get the job done instead of focusing on something new. I think this is what it was in the beginning when I tried to sort of understand more about IoT and how to get the data out. And like Brian said, I mean, I have this podcast and newsletter where I try to interview global leaders in the space. And I through that sort of interviewing people not only in the building automation space, but also, working with autonomous vehicles or how they push through 50 millions of data records or health records in the healthcare space, or how they, put this orbital reef in NASA and digital twins in manufacturing and all these kind of things. I think I've learned a couple of things of what to do and what not to do. And I definitely see that, I agree with, Alper and Calvin that, there has been a lot of change, I think, over the last couple of years, but it's also, hard. It's things are changing if you dare to look at it. But for the ones, procuring, for the ones that, are out there, it's not that much that has changed. And I think also, most people in the industry, they just want the things that work. I mean, they don't necessarily, think about digital twins or don't want to think about digital twins or open source, all this kind of stuff. They just want to buy something that they know will work and, will, keep over time. And if you want to invite to innovate, you got to be able to do that. Right now, I think, a lot of people in the industry, I think, Brian has worked a lot with this, trying to get this one API to the building where you can invite full stack developers, you can invite teams from basically anywhere outside the industry, and also have, teams that work with a sort of traditional person that knows the HVAC side, knows the BAS side, but, coupled with maybe some machine learning with some developers, and be able to put them together and create solutions that, companies want. I think that's sort of, I was going to share something. Sorry about that. That's sort of where we're heading, and that's sort of where I want to get to as well. So, I mean, again, I'm just going to go through this. Sorry, just give me 2 seconds here. So, I think it's, the vision that I've seen is that I believe that, we have people, they can get this stuff done, like Alper, like Calvin, like Brian, like Brad. Or someone in Australia or in China or in wherever it might be, it doesn't really matter. And we also have the systems to get the data out. But I think it's understanding and knowing where those people are what system to use in what order, and also bring them in to innovate, like I like to call it. So I think like some of you might have seen this, but this is just an example what could happen if we just put some of the modern tools in the right order. So we're using open source software stacks where you have a hardware vendor here where we're, got in 3 schools and we're connecting all the radiators. So we can remotely control them based on temperature readings in the building, weather data, booking system, CO2, temperature, humidity, all these kind of things. And for the most part, it's interesting because we can invite, again, like IoT experts, we can invite the kindergarten teachers, we can invite the principals, which we have done, and to stand here in the same reality and to look at this stuff and to have a conversation about something as heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or what happens if we do this, or in these rooms, we're not feeling great, like after 3 p.m. All this kind of stuff is, I think, like that. This is what is needed in order to make this industry move forward. Not that is, again, like we have the skill shortage gap. So I think like, this is the stuff that I'm working on, and I have some idea about hardware, software, cloud, digital twins, AI, because I'm working on this on a daily basis. So I'm really, passionate about the openness, and I definitely also what, Brian was saying, that it's not just about open systems, but open mindsets and, how open is this industry? How easy is it to get someone into a real estate, existing real estate, or even new construction for that matter, and to have new ideas and to see them implemented and to make efficiency happen much, much faster. That's sort of, my passion and sort of what I'm here to talk about.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. Before we go to audience stuff, Brad, do you have anything you'd like to add, just from a consulting engineer perspective, especially if you're working on designs 2, 3, 4, 5 years before the building's constructed, and how are you mitigating and how do you stop yourself from designing something that's obsolete when the building's actually built, and how do you think the engineering community needs to maybe change to accommodate, kind of the best of breed and the current technology versus something that might not work anymore when the building's actually there?
So thanks, Brian. I think the biggest challenge in the engineering community is there are very few engineers who I think actually understand controls well. So I actually think the problem is a lot more fundamental than even understanding building system, like understanding the details of open control systems. But I think one of the big problems in the engineering community is I think we leave far too much of the design to the contractors, and I think that is fine when you're working with a good contractor. It's terrible when you're not. But often for some reason it often falls on the mechanical engineer to do the control spec. And you can probably count on one hand the number of engineers mechanical engineers you'll find who understand BAS networking, for example, who understand really understand open protocols. So I think that's where we start by trying to spec the system in such a way that at least we're going to get close to what we want at the end. And to the extent we have control over whoever the vendor is ultimately going to be, sometimes that's value engineered out of your hands, but sometimes you do get a chance to play a role in that selection. And then you try to work with them to design the system with all of the open pieces that you want in there, and try to resist the pressure that is always there to make things proprietary. They'll dangle incentives around cost in front of you or capability. I'd say it's a constant battle in these kinds of projects to try to keep things open, and the temptation is always there to kind of take the easy way out and kind of go with a proprietary solution. So it's hard, and I think it starts with a lot more education in the engineering community around controls, and it starts at a basic level. I mean, even if we could just understand the basics of IP networking and the appropriate use of MSTP subnetworks and that sort of thing, we would be light years ahead of where we are today. The one other comment I wanted to make just around the why for open system zones, actually outside of my role as consulting engineer, but we've also gotten involved working with some software startups in this space, they're trying to do AI stuff in buildings, and that's kind of not relevant to my point. But what's interesting is because their application requires data, what they did, rather than design their own data acquisition solution or go and find another company to partner with, what they did is took an open source solution, which is Project Voltron, which is DOE funded originally, and they've incorporated that open source project into their software project, which allowed them to avoid having to build this new thing from scratch. And I think that for me was a really illustrated to me the power in some of this open source capability. Like, why is I think it enables innovation. It means that companies that want to do X can focus on X, and if they can find open source solutions that do all of the other visualization, data acquisition, there's all sorts of good open source solutions out there already for that. Not to mention all the things that Alper and Calvin have talked about. I think if we have good open source solutions, then innovation becomes much easier, because then you can focus on just the piece, whether it's AI for buildings, whether it's some other new tool or piece of software that you want to design. That's a lot easier because you can rely on this backbone of open source projects that kind of do a lot of the nuts and bolts. But without those, your product or project would go nowhere. So I think there's a lot of whys for open source, and as consultants, we have our work cut out for us, and I think a tremendous amount of education around kind of understanding this, and stop letting the contractors drive the design. I think consultants need to get a lot more forceful about getting what they want out of the project.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it's funny because a big piece of our company is MSI, and we do a lot of that consulting with them. And so I right now, the current state of how designs get done, especially on design build projects, we are in there a lot and helping the clients with design, and it's difficult to make sure that you can meet their use cases and find a product that won't lock them in, because at the end of the day, we're all going to buy somebody's stuff. Somebody's got to make it. Somebody's going to get paid for it. But it's really trying to be as open as you can at each piece of this layer.
Yeah, so I would say having an independent MSI working with the consulting engineer is a huge step forward.
Yeah, it is, and especially if the consulting, like what we've seen most success is when consulting engineer actually stays with the project through the project and doesn't just turn it over and think they're done now, because that's a big benefit as well. But I'd like to open it up for questions. Anybody's fair game. So it looks like we got one.
I'm just curious why you don't mention 709.1 as an open protocol, and the landmark interoperability standards, functional profiles, things that have been out for many years.
Yeah, it's a great question. Anyone want to tackle that?
What was the question? Actual question?
Oh, sorry. The question was why we're not using 709 or LawnWorks, Lawnmark as an example of open standards to adopt, since it's been around for literally 2 to 3 decades.
Yeah.
I mean, I can take a stab at it, even though I'm not from the US, but I mean, like, it's existing industry dynamics. I mean, that's basically how it is. I mean, I think, like Brad, you answered it more or less. It's easy to take the ones that, have the lowest cost or the benefits, or is it tied to an MSI that is not necessarily independent, or whatever it might be. It's existing industry dynamics that affect these choices. So, I mean, again, like, even if, interoperable does exist, or like BACnet or open and all these kind of things. So I think, like, it's not the lack of technology or interoperability or taxonomies or ontologies out there that is, keeping this industry at bay from innovation. It's existing, again, like organizations, business models, and and of course lack of awareness. And I've talked to so many companies that are waiting for the real estate owners to demand something else that they're not demanding today. But who's going to educate them? And on the other side as well. So I think that's sort of, again, even if we blast this on New York Times or whatever you have there, the newest interoperability standard is now here. Okay, I mean, I don't think that's really the problem. I don't know if that sort of answers it. Maybe Brad, you want to take a stab at it as well, but it's not technology, I think.
I mean, I would agree largely that it's a business. I mean, a short example is in my specific geographical area where we work, I actually could not find anyone to rep a Lawnmark's product right now, and I haven't been able to for 15 years. Everybody here is backnet through and through, and now that may be I realize that's not true everywhere, but whereas a true open source product, I can get. I can download it. We can make use of it. So I think there is a difference there between sort of a true open source and, admittedly, Lawn has a lot of nice open features, but in my case, not an option because I can't find a contractor locally that would install it for me.
Well, I mean, you can go to the Lawnmark website. They've got a whole database of Lawnmark professionals, and I just purchased a half a dozen VAV controllers from a company that's out of Vancouver called Efficient Building Automation, the old Circon company. These are open VAV controllers with Lawnmark functional profiles. I can replace them with another manufacturer. I know what I'm going to get IO-wise, software-wise, configuration-wise. I'm just not sure why we're trying to reinvent the wheel when something's already out there.
Yeah, I think you're just talking two different layers of open. So what Alper and Calvin were talking about was actually opening up the piece of the stack that LawnWorks and Lawnmark actually own and proprietary. Yeah. So that's one aspect of that answer.
It's actually not proprietary.
Well, it's not open source to my knowledge.
It is open source. Yeah, it's all published. It's totally published.
Okay.
I have a kind of comment related to that. It's not really for or against what you're saying, but one thing that I really see a lot, especially in coming out of the world of people who are not in controls, like, other general contractors and specifiers, a common misconception I see is, especially even with specifiers, is the difference between an open network protocol and an open, I don't know what you want to call it, like a DDC architecture. Like, we have LAN and we have BACnet and we have all these great protocols, but that only allows you to see, a network information and points that are exposed from the device. Which is fine in most cases. Like if you have an electric meter, all you need to know is all the various points that the electric meter offers. There's no reason for a person to actually go in and see what the internal sequence of the electric meter, how it comes to those values. As long as the meter works, then you can trust that its output is correct. Kind of what I'm talking about and what Albert's talking about is for the field programmable controllers where the sequence may change, there really is no standard adopted framework for what the controller is doing internally to arrive at, like say if you have a differential pressure, like what it's doing to come out with, that speed. You can only really see points that the particular vendor chooses to expose, and going back to reinventing the wheel, there have been a lot of attempts to create open architecture DDC control in the past, but right now, what we have is the answer is oh well, if I want to see what this controller is doing internally, I have to go to the particular manufacturer's proprietary programming tool that is only for this device and only as long as the manufacturer is willing to support it. What I'd like to see is, as many people as possible come together. And I guess the first step would be like, maybe we could say like, in the same spirit of BACnet, this is a standard application format that a device could consume. Like a lot of these applications are in XML format, and how they're actually executed on the device isn't relevant to what the program is. The program describes what's there and the device execute, like, kind of in the same way like HTML code is consumed by all different types of browsers. You could do that with, with the program.
I want to answer your question. You can blame ASHRAE for killing lawnworks. And also, I never got used to the snivets as well.
I've got 24 buildings that are all lawn, and a lot of them have devices from 10 different manufacturers all communicating in a peer-to-peer way, and a server sitting on that network that serves up an HMI to the to the owner and the building manager. So I don't see it as dead. But go ahead.
Yeah, you can blame ASHRAE for it. Yeah.
All right. So
kill it?
let's.
Backing back now? Yeah. Let's get the topic back to normal.
Yeah. So I want to just to the point of whether any of these protocols is the one or not. It reminds me of Nicholas before we started this asked me if my ontology wars were still going, and I see John Petsy over here, and he and I have chuckle about this, but. It's amazing, Haystack's been around for a long time, and yet nobody has just universally adopted Haystack as the ontology for the entire built world, right? Instead, we've got big brands out there coming up with their own ontologies, and so we've spent a lot of time with our own ontology alignment project just to try to align all of these things, and so we're not here to say whether or not one protocol is better than another. They all have to fit in. We have to make use of all of them. And the market will dictate the winners and the losers, or which ones are used more often and less often. So I'd like to move on to another question. Anyone brave? All right, Brad.
Thank you. So I'm a specifying engineer, and I've stopped using the term open architecture. Really, you've got open protocol and you've got open channel. So many people can support open protocol, it's open channel, it's a differentiator. So I have those conversations with folks about how many integrators are there in this market that can support this client if they decide they want to move on from this. Or if it's a Sunday night and they have somebody they need to call to get something fixed right away, they may need to just run down their phone tree. So there's a lot of reasons why they want to have multiple vendors. I like this, I've talked with Alper about this over the years on being able to have something that's open source, but this feels like it's even more limiting to the vendors who are able to put this out there. I rely on a lot of that manufacturer training. We're putting walls together to make sure that we're able to meet those requirements for the project. And when you're going to go open source, that's something I will be challenged with. Do you have any ideas on how that can be something that as a specifier I can write in my projects and know we're going to get a level playing field for people who are going to be trained on a product?
Yeah, I mean, training is important, really important. And the way I'm trying to tackle it is that we are making a website that is a platform where anyone can go in and learn about Sandstar. The source code is open. Also, we are trying to make the whole application stack open as well within the controller. Right now, we have Sandstar that is control engine, but getting it connected to a central platform. We are using SkySpark, but SkySpark has an open initiative called Haxel. We are going to also utilize that. One more thing that I would add on to our industry, these controllers does not only have to be in HVAC. You can use these for, the cannabis industry or anything that needs input and output to control. And having it open on the web where people can play, I think we will get to that threshold of having more contractors or engineers knowing the system.
And then the follow-up to that is on the hardware side. You mentioned contemporary controls, distributed Raspberry Pi. That's something I've run into before, but I want to make sure that I've had Raspberry Pis in my media center for years, and replacing cards as they get corrupted is always an issue. Just a number of things that go along with an open source hardware like that. Is there that channel as well to be able to get quality products?
That's a great point. The contemporary controls product, that's a great example of the type of hardware that I like. And the reason for that is that any hardware where the owner has full control over the operating system, in some cases can be a great idea. For the owners where you can take that system level administration, not the DDC stuff, not the specific support like that we provide, but the low level support, like the system administration, we could just throw that on the IT department, because in a lot of these devices, they're operating systems that they're familiar with, especially Linux. There's no such thing as embedded Linux, right? The Linux that's running in this device is the same Linux that's running on a server. And I think that for certain owners, as they discover that they have tons of computers in their ceiling that are running operating systems, they're going to want some level of administrative access to the device, and they're going to want to be able to get in there and support the device and make sure it's secure, and also over time maintain it. That's a task that we can throw on facilities, and then we will be the specialists that specialize in DEC for specific applications. Like we'll do the air handler programming, they maintain the system. And with the devices that exist today, you can make a clear separation between the two. It's possible now. Before it wasn't. It was the thing had firmware, and there's no way to divide up different tasks to different people. But now you have something that can run multiple processes, multiple different programming paradigms. I mean, you could take one of these controllers that they're coming out with now, and you can run DEC, and alongside you can have a Niagara Station, and you can have SkySpark on a controller, which he's done. That's pretty remarkable, and those processes don't interfere with each other. The DDC process, which is the real-time process, which is the most important thing, opening and closing valves, making sure nothing gets damaged or anybody gets hurt, can be the real-time process that happens first. And then all these web things and, like the discovery and the haystack can happen when the controller has time to manage it, because it's not like an
You asked about the SD card burnout issues.
Yeah.
You can use PCLC SD cards. They last longer. And we also worked on a project called UPS. It's a mini UPS to keep the devices running and shutting down if there's no power on the device.
That's a great point. Like, these SD cards, right now you have a PC, the SD card is a hard drive in some cases. And in the case of actual like real products that people are using, not just Raspberry Pis and stuff, not all SD cards are created equal. And then also the type of connector that you connect the SD card with, they're not all the same too. A lot of problems I've seen is, you attach one of these controllers with a SD card based device onto like an air handler or something that vibrates. The actual contacts of the SD card will shake loose. And I've seen that happen. And, they designed the SD cards to like prevent like being corrupted if the power goes on and off, but like not to that degree where the contacts are coming loose. We've had issues on some job sites. You can mitigate that through using better SD connectors, or also using the type of MMC that's actually like soldered to the board. Yeah, it's like a package that can't be taken off. And in the same way that this thing, you could pull this out and re-image. If this thing, you brick the controller, you can re-flash the SD image. And there's a lot of really easy open ways to do that, like just plugging in a serial cable. So you'll never have a controller go bad unless you fry something, unless you take 120 to it. If you have a problem with your disk image, you can just redo it, because your IT department will have images that they can clone.
Right. So I'd like to get to you in just one second, but I do want to ask maybe Nicholas and Brad, if what Alper and Calvin are talking about is the beginning stages, early stages of getting to, let's say, openness at the platform level, and not necessarily the communication, right? It's just the platform itself. What's the dependency on mass adoption for major manufacturers and vendors to actually start supporting this? Can it be done by a bunch of smaller organizations globally, or do we really need the support of the megas out there?
I can start. I mean, this great question. I've been writing stuff down here, and I think, I'm all for open, definitely. But I think, Brad was talking about proprietary. We're talking about, all these kind of things. For me, proprietary is not always bad if it is open and interoperable, because you need something that works. right? And you also, from a business model perspective, I'm suffering from this right now. And I saw John Petsy, I don't know, he's out of my image, but maybe he's there still. He complained, or like rightly so, that I make my LinkedIn post a little bit too fluffy, because I actually told him how hard it is to work with new products, right? Someone, the manufacturing, someone has manufactured something somewhere in the wrong way. Electricians are installing things the wrong way. We get, all these kind of things that can go wrong usually goes wrong. So there's also, with existing products, and again, the gentleman who talked about Loanworks or, peer-to-peer, and this stuff works, that's fantastic. So I think it's open is great if you can get the data out, and if it's interoperable and you combine Loanwork with BACnet, with Alper stuff, with Calvin stuff, to be able to use the right tools, again, like in the right order, because, we can't rip and replace everywhere. We have to, work with a lot of the situations as is and get that stuff out. And if the question is, if can smaller companies get this done? Possibly. I definitely think so, but we're not necessarily there yet, I think. And it's a risk because these systems, they're going to stay in the buildings for 10, 20, 30 years. And I think we need to reach this, level of robustness. I mean, you have to have buildings that are robust, useful, and attractive, as well as the solutions that are in there. I mean, I'm suffering from it right now, trying to take a new product to market, and it's not easy, even if, combine state-of-the-art tools that are supposed to be interoperable, but they haven't worked together yet. So I think there's this, again, there's still, the middle ground where, nothing is really happening. You have the small stuff and you have the big stuff. There are some companies right now that are getting VC funding, getting out there with new products. But again, are they bringing, more openness to the industry, or is just, proprietary stuff on another level? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, no,
but it's definitely
great
interesting,
point.
right?
So can we get the gentleman in the back there? You'll be next.
I want to ask about something that you said about throwing it on the IT department. And my experience has always been hard enough to get a single IP address at a building, and let alone, involving the IT department throughout the entire design process of a building control system is, to my knowledge, impossible at this point. I was wondering if you can, I don't know, pointers or how is that actually done? I design BMS control systems, right? And this open thing is a great thing, and I've tried it, and it's just, again, the IT department's not something that's set up yet that I even know about, I guess. I'm so far down the totem pole that I can't push back, if you will. So I was wondering if you can, I don't know, how do I go about that? Who do I talk to? Not who do I talk to, but at what stage do I need to get this involved, kind of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I run across that a lot. We're doing the energy valves that have the IP connection on there. And every time I design a system, I'm like, hey, these energy valves come with a IP connection. What we should do is we should take it back to the switch in the air handler, because the functionality of the thing is greatly enhanced if you can get the web access. You can do all kinds of stuff, and that always gets shot down. Because I'm low engineer, and they're all like, we're not going to do that. I'm like, why? It's better. And they're like, well, we're not going to run Ethernet 10 feet, and 2, I have to ask for 2 more IP addresses. It's a real struggle. To answer your question, I think that IT departments didn't even exist, 30 years ago. There wasn't, you'd be like, IT department, like, who's that? And people take care of your computers. It's like, we don't use computers. I think that a new profession is going to have to emerge. And people with certain types of buildings, like the higher end buildings, are going to have these people. It's going to be a specialist that is cross-trained in both, maintaining all the printers and fax machines, but then also the facilities operations. So they're going to have to know a little bit of both. Maybe not everything, maybe not specifically how this chiller is supposed to start up, but they have to know what a chiller is, and that it's controlled by a thing that has an operating system, and that thing has to be secured just like everything else in the building.
We have one answer for that. We have one enterprise company that is not allowing IP at Ethernet lately. And what happened is the chip shortage crisis, where they cannot buy VAV boxes with MSTP on them. They started buying IP devices, and they're dealing with the IP connectivity now because they can't just buy regular MSTP devices. So
Yeah,
it's a funny answer. Like,
sorry, so yeah, no, I think it's gonna be pressures like that. It's gonna be pressures like security. They're gonna start driving more of this. I've heard it called corporate engineering, maybe not IT. I've seen IT organizations start to split up into different specialties. And I think this will end up being one. Brad, did you have some comments, or Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I empathize with the questioner because it's a problem we run into. I mean, I'll say, I have seen IT departments who get it and have been a good partner in the design process, and who will, we say, here's a list of all the IP drops we want, and it may be 1,000. And that's, as an organization, they have that level of buy-in that is okay, and they will support it. We've seen it go the other way too, where the IT department has no interest in anything to do with building automation. And then we've gone the route of setting up a separate, OT network. And I mean, you can go listen to Scott Cochran talk your ear off about OT and basically taking it away from IT, having an operational technology dedicated network, and running sort of a parallel infrastructure that is dedicated to building technology, but is separate from the corporate data network. And I'll say, there are merits to both approaches. In my experience, it really comes down to, what does the client want? I have some clients that absolutely insist that everything is on one corporate network and no amount of talking will change their mind. And I have others that could care less. And we've got sort of more latitude to influence them. I think you got to figure out pretty early on in the process which one you're dealing with. And then from there, you can kind of figure out how to engage. And I mean, at the end of the day, we've been successful if they, at the end of the day, they want the capability that comes with a fully IP enabled network. If you get the right people convinced, then they can tell IT that they need to get on board and support that. And if you can't get there, they're not going to get that capability, and you kind of don't push it. It's really, really client driven, and you end up in a lot of meetings with a lot of different stakeholders. And as Brian rightly pointed out, the cybersecurity thing is starting to drive a lot more of this. And I've heard, the topic of cybersecurity come up more in the last year and a half than I have in probably the previous 10 years. So there's all sorts of interesting dynamics that are sort of affecting this right now. It's too early, I think, to say if there's going to be one way this is going to end up, but at the end of the day, it's sort of engagement and understanding your client and sort of where they're at.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Another question right here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've run into that problem too, and what we've done to get around it is we go out and we buy a $100 data modem from Verizon, called it Jetpack. That goes on the building, $20 a month data, unlimited data connection speed, and problem solved. We own the the network that's connected to the building automation. We're great in small and medium-sized buildings.
Right. Yeah, and I
manage that.
I think that is a great solution as long as the customer understands what's going on and they're fully aware.
Yeah.
Because obviously you want to make sure that nobody's in jeopardy.
Yeah, we're in the design build world. Yeah. We don't do plan specs, so we're working directly with the owners and getting their input.
Yeah, no, it's a great solution because if you're doing it with the consent of the owner, like on purpose, right? Then it provides that secure connectivity. You can get 4G or 5G, coming.
A lot of them like it because it doesn't touch their network, right?
Yep.
It's just the chiller, the boiler, the cooling tower. And,
it's a good solution. Unfortunately, I think that is a great solution wherever, and unfortunately, there's still a lot of customers out there that as soon as IP comes up, the IT department insists that they need to be involved. I think whether they know what they're getting themselves into or not, but it's one of those words. It's it's IP.
In our buildings, there is no IT department. They're small buildings, and
I envy you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But my main question was OPC. How does this protocol and data method fit into what you guys are talking about? Is it part of the solution or not?
Well, sure. It's another protocol, communication protocol that we can get data from, right? And there's lots of, there's devices like power meters. There's also systems, especially as you get more on the industrial side of things or light industrial, that you can get data from. So yeah, no, it certainly is part of the stack when you're talking about the protocol layer, for sure. And again, you know, those vendors, those manufacturers chose OPC for one reason or another. A lot of it were market conditions, the market their devices are for, and the protocols are expected and accepted in those those markets. But you could also go back to those guys and say why, right? There were other choices, but you know, like I said, when people start innovating, and we're guilty of this ourselves, right? We have an integrated building management platform that we started building, and it's out now, and it's 6 years in the making. And when I talk to other MSIs around the world, I find out that thousands of MSIs all have their own version of what we built at different layers. And of course, that's not going to scale, right? There's only going to be a few winners at that layer. And so as innovation happens, that's what happens, right? Lots of people see the problem, lots of people are trying to address it, and eventually the winners come out. And I think, if you look at the true amount of protocols that we have globally, it's relatively few when you can imagine how many people were trying to solve the problem before they ultimately coalesce to the relative few. I mean, Nick talks a lot about Sweden and the protocols he's dealing with in Sweden, and that he wishes he had more protocol choice in that market. So I think OPC is just another one of those. I think we have time for one more question. All right, Nick, since I cut you off, you want to say any last words?
Sure, always. No, I mean, I think it's a fascinating discussion, right? And I think, again, for me, when I look at buildings now, when I sort of made this journey first through existing buildings, then through construction, working with architects, and seeing how interesting that is to some perspective. I think it's, again, we're moving more towards, what do we need to do and how fast can we do it and at what cost, right? And also looking at different metrics. I think, with the HVAC industry has been, focusing a lot on energy, obviously energy efficiency. We're starting to see more about the whole building. And, what you've been talking about as well, Brian, right? I mean, like well-being, productivity, maintenance, the 330-300 rule, and the whole building. And also looking at, the users of that building. What are the KPIs? So I think, like, for me, the openness part, if you're going to go back to sort of like that stuff, is when you can have a tenant, either, in design build phase or, before this, working with Brad or for existing buildings, where they can explain, what they actually want or what they're suffering from. Someone can understand that quickly and actually fix those problems without that taking 6 months or costing a fortune for integration. And that, demands interoperability, demands open source, it demands openness that we don't necessarily have today, and also openness about vendors. So I think, we're getting there, and hopefully, we see this crush between everything that is happening in the context and rules and regulations, putting much pressure on getting data out faster, net zero buildings, all these kind of things. And so I think, we're going to get there much, much faster, hopefully. I always say this, I said this, 2 years ago, 3 years ago as well, than what most people think. But at the same time, it's not easy. But I also see, like, the big vendors are becoming more open. It's becoming more interoperable. We're seeing taxonomies and ontologies finding their way into the large vendors. So getting data out in a structured format is not as hard as it was just 1 or 2 years ago. So I think, like, we're getting there on all fronts, and, we have to get there. But I think it's definitely positive. And, just a final point on what you said, Brian, as in, we're seeing this convergence. I mean, I've been dreaming about, an app store for buildings for the last 7 years. That's why I went into the industry. So I think that's also, where we have some kind of, this converged network layer, whatever you want to call it, one API to the building that offers freedom of choice, so that anyone can actually build a plethora of different solutions catering to different needs in form of apps,
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of where we want to get to. And I think we're already there, but again, we're maybe not seeing it.
Yeah, all great points. Just want to finish off by saying thank you to Automated Buildings, Stockman Supply, and our panelists, and ASHRAE, and thank you guys all for being here. Certain somebody might stay on the line if you guys have any follow-up questions. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.